Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co.
I'm Shira.
And I'm Jesse Anderson from Quackalope.
Yes, in fact, we're in your studio, aren't we?
We are. I think this is the first time since we moved close to you, because you've said, I want to avoid collaborating as much as possible.
Not entirely.
What?
I like it when it's my studio. I don't want it to feel like it's your studio, but the problem is we're limited on time today, and also this is all set up and done because...
We just got finished with the gameplay, which should be live, the day before.
None of you have said what we're talking about
this
yet.
This is up. What are you... They clicked on the video.
It's called
They know
Yucatan.
exactly what
We
we're
are
talking
giving
thumbnail.
you a first look at Yucatan, a review.
Of Yucatan from Madago. This is the fourth game in what was previously a trilogy, is now a quadrology of Cyclades, Inish, Kemet, and now Yucatan.
There's a gameplay up on Quackalope if you want to go check that out. This is going to be a detailed review where we're not going to hold punches, and we haven't talked about it between ourselves since the gameplay went up, which means I'm really, really interested to hear what these two have to say.
But before we go into that, before we go into opinions, we'll shy away from those temporarily. Let's go ahead into general idea of the game, just so you know what we're talking about. And I'm going to keep this fairly quick, not fully in depth. This is basically area control-ish, although not really. There's not really much in it. I mean, you technically hold onto a city, very minimal in area control genre.
You're starting this very rough.
Usually I don't have people in my way. Oh, it must be very difficult for you. How do you deal with interruptions all the time? Anyways, moving on to the basic idea is you're taking actions every single round. The game's going to be played across 4 rounds, and you're trying to get as many points as possible. Points are primarily going to come through sacrifice. You're trying to take hostages in battle so you can sacrifice them at the end of the round so that you can get points. That is the primary mechanism of the game. Hostages will decrease in value every single round. You have 4 rounds. They're going to be worth 3, 2, 2, 1 respectively. So you want to get that early game buff in, but you also want to build up your stuff. You want to get monsters. You want to build up your forces. You want to build up your buildings. You're trying to build up your general economy across the whole game so you can become as powerful as possible, so you can have these cool gigantic snake creatures that just smack people in the face and do the things and take the hostages, all those kinds of things. General turn sequence is going to be taking 2 actions across 3 different turns. You can have 3 turns from each of the 4 rounds. In each turn, you take 2 actions. One action is often a building action, some form of a buff on your buildings, whether it's recruiting creatures, whether it's adding, whether it's building more buildings, things like that. And then you take an action with one of your 3 leaders. Your leaders have an economic leader that will give you some sort of extra resources, as well as 2 other leaders. Those 2 leaders are going to be the way you charge into combat. You're going to be charging into combat to go to one of these central cities where you'll engage in combat, and then if you are the person standing at the end of it, you'll also take the action of the central city. I'm skipping over a lot of the potential exceptions that lots of abilities will come into play and give you. There's lots of different things. Ultimately, you're trying to get into combat so you can take the action of central city, which is good. That's economy or points as the game progresses, things like that. But then also combat itself is how you take hostages. There's all kinds of abilities from your monsters, from your tiles, from your buildings. Every single thing is going to give you some way of breaking that game, breaking the game, giving you extra abilities, and often turning into extra hostages. There's going to be card play in the combat, where every single round you're going to pick one of your cards from your hand, secretly place it down, which is going to be the unknown aspect, flipping it over, doing what that says, which often has extra strength, or hostages, or combat modifications, points if you win, things like that. Rinse and repeat until the game is over, and that's basically what's going on. A few other small things, such as a track over there, which tracks how well you can, what level abilities, monsters, and buildings you can actually get. There's 3 levels, and you have to earn those levels first, and you earn that through sacrificing and increasing the amount of sacrifice you have every round. A few other things, we're not going to go into every little thing, but that's basically Yucatan. Fight, charge into combat, take hostages, sacrifice, win the game. Anything I missed?
No.
I mean, probably a lot, but small detail stuff. So, with that said, let's start off with ease of play. Ease of play is generally where I talk about things like rules, teachability, table space, all those things, game length, stuff like that.
And with that in mind, this is still a prototype.
I was going to say the exact same thing. Our entire opinion is tainted by that.
This entire thing, prototype, left, right, and center. Oh, and link to the Kickstarter down below, all that stuff. But as far as ease of play, the rules are actually very short, which is a plus side. They're like literally 8 pages. The downside is because prototype, lots of small little edge cases missing. I assume those will be cleaned up for the most part. I mean, the amount of small things missing, and even all the small things, I think almost all of them, I would have gone with the way that was actually correct once we got those clarifications, so mostly fine.
If we're projecting into the future, and granted, I didn't have to learn the game, you taught me the game, but as someone that received the game, even with prototype caveats, this was not the hardest to teach. I think this will probably be a mid to lightweight version of this genre of game. I think it's fairly accessible once you get your head wrapped around some of the iconography.
Yeah.
Yes, I do think an iconography grid and key would have been helpful. I know it's a prototype, and I'm not taking it for it being a prototype. Hopefully,
but they should have that.
They should have that in the future finished version, because there are some little iconography, especially on cards that you get as like a secret, and you don't want to show your friends and say, "Hey, this is what I have. What does it mean?" You want to be able to look at something. They do have a really handy dandy player aid that did explain a lot of things, which I
just needs an
points
index
for.
in there.
Yes.
It needs those last icons that I'm missing. But
Yep.
I agree, it definitely needs some sort of iconography thing. Hopefully that will be available. Hopefully it's added to the player aid. Just every single icon should be somewhere visible, and some of them aren't. Some of them are edge cases or guessing from other icons or things like that. As far as teaching the game, I found teaching the game to be mostly reasonable. Again, going through a few bumps in the road as far as things we weren't clear on, but a fairly easy teach, especially if you're familiar with this genre. One thing that people have to kind of mentally get over is the fact that there's really just these 3 cities you're charging into. All the other places are not combat areas. There's no combat in the other areas.
You also have to realize
just
that you
the
are
forest.
only using each one of your troops 4 times. You are using them once per round.
Yes.
And it's very interesting to wrap your head. Like, you are using this...
You have to use them a lot defensively.
Right.
You only get to initiate attack.
Offensively,
Yeah.
you're going into it 4 times. So...
Yeah. As far as table space, it is not a small game as far as table space. I mean, what you see here is a lot, and more players add more. It's not the worst, but it's certainly on the larger size. Understand that you do need table space in order to play this game. And lastly...
Setup's a little fiddly.
Oh, setup, I actually thought it was... Oh, no,
It's
you're
not
right, you're right.
terrible,
No,
it's a
the
bit
tokens-
You have your
Every
whole-
person has their whole grid of
Yeah.
upgrades, and you have to take the time to organize, sort, and place those
I
out.
would
It's not
love-
the worst, but it's not the best.
If they have some sort of a little player tray where you store that, would be amazing. It would really, really
I
help.
was just thinking about, like, Chip Theory Games does that for their dices. Like, it would be really cool if they had a way to store all of these upgrades that you can also see them. Because
Yes.
sometimes as you go through the level of the buildings and you go through the levels of the troops, they're different. And so...
But even Matago,
I guess you could also look in here to see what your options are and have these just in a
No,
nice little
having
tray.
it accessible would be great. But even Matago on their last Kickstarter on Kemet, they had player trays for all the tiles. I
Yeah.
don't know if they're doing that here at all. I'd love to see it. It was
would-
the fiddly
it would
part,
benefit from
If you ignore that aspect, if you ignore those tiles, it's spend like 3 minutes. It's those tiles where you're like, okay, great, now I need my personal player tiles. Lastly, as far as game time, this comes in, depends on the game, but like we've been knocking this out under 2 hours, I think, like really every time, basically.
I'd say on the edge of 2 hours.
Edge of 2
Under
hours.
2, but you're being generous, depending on how slow some people can play. There's potential for a lot of AP, but, you know.
Yeah. As far as player count, it's a 1 to 4 player game. We've only played this, I think both of us, well, all of us have only played this at 3 and 4 players so far.
Yep.
It's not, I mean, I could see it working at
I
2, but I
don't-
don't know if I want to dive into it.
I'm not entirely sure how it would function at 2.
I don't see how it works at 2.
I mean, it's just fighting back and forth. It's more back and
guess.
forth as opposed to that edge third player. 2 is not a player count. I'm looking forward to playing it. It's the player count that I'd play it if someone's like, by the way, I played Yucatan. It's really great at 2.
Right.
From my experience so far, I'd probably only play it at 2 if people said, hey, it's really, really great at 2. And I'd be like, okay, I'll give it a shot.
And I gotta be honest, my preference, my strong preference is gonna be 4.
Interesting.
Leaning into with the caveat that 4 is gonna add a whole pile of extra time, probably an extra, I'd say 30 minutes per player. But I have some complaints about the 3 player that I'm going to get into.
I know what you're going to get into the
Yeah.
complaints. I don't know if I feel strongly, because for me at that time is a factor. I understand and agree with what you're saying. I don't know if I'm willing to pick a preferred player count myself just yet.
We'll get into that.
Yeah.
I'm leaning towards 4, which is true for a lot of these larger area control-esque genre games.
Which brings us to what we like. Sure, you want to start this off?
No.
No. she got whatever. So, liking. You want to take it, or should I can jump into it?
I'm happy to jump into
Go
it.
for it.
So, for the record, I believe I have played all the previous.
You have played Inish, Cyclades, Kemet, and Yucatan.
Okay. I am not the biggest fan of this series or this genre.
You like
so
Cyclades?
I liked it the best out of all of them so far.
You liked Cyclades.
But
But you're rewriting history.
No. I liked it the best out of the
Okay.
genre so far, but when you compare it up against other area control that we play, like Blood Rage, I feel like it is still not quite there, right?
Yep.
For you, they were all in your top 20. So
I mean, Blood Rage was my number 3 of all time, and Cyclades was my number 5 of all time, and Inish was my number 4 of all time. So it's got chops.
the stuff, I just wanted to give a little bit of a caveat to where I sit with this whole thing, because it'll make an interesting
Comparison.
ending. The things that I like the most about the game so far, I really like the balance of your personal player deck and your personal player board. The 2 areas that I find the most interesting in those is going to be first off with your player deck. These cards control the way that you're engaging in combat throughout the game. They give you buffs and debuffs both when you win and lose, taking extra victims so you can sacrifice them, getting extra strength, and specifically letting you knock people out to guarantee that you get the reward, letting you gain victory points if you need to, and even some things where you can discard your troops in order to gain extra resources during the course of battle. That becomes really interesting when you start pairing it with the opportunity to upgrade your deck throughout the course of the game. You don't have to do the card that refreshes your pile every single round or turn. Instead, you can play a lot of the game just by adding
really
cards to your
drag it out.
hand, and then you have this bluff where you're not sure what you have, what other people have, or what's been revealed yet. Like early on in the gameplay,
It's like perfect information.
I
You
got
have
a
your 3, I
super-
have my 2, you have this card, the game escalates, and
Yeah.
suddenly that's completely out the window.
and I like that puzzle, and I deck playing or sort of trick taking in a way when it comes to the cards that you have in your hand is one of my favorite bluffing mechanics in area control games, and this game I think does it really well because you're asymmetrically buffing your own personal deck, and you usually get some control after that. Usually the most common way to do that in our experience has been pay 3, draw 1, discard 2. Now you're not always going to have that, but for 2 of us that's what we chose. The board itself, I really like the way that you just start upgrading your specific factions. And it'll be easier once we have a full production copy, so we're not questioning which prototypes are which. But the 2 different troops, the fact that you operate them so limited, but you're incentivized to build them in a way that makes people fight them, but doesn't make them so strong that people avoid them. You want to engage in combat as much as possible, and the troop development I find really intriguing. It's this pressure point. Yep. You need to be strong enough to win, but not so strong enough no one wants to fight with you.
That's a big deal of the game. A big part of the game. I think arguably, well, we won't get into what happens in the game, but the idea of not being too strong is a huge thing. You kind of want those upgrades, but you want the upgrades that don't threaten people. You want the upgrades that are good without threatening people. It's
you also want to time it, because if you get too strong first, then people are going to avoid you until they get strong enough, and so then you're kind of like laying in the wayside for a couple rounds, which makes a meaningful difference in capturing these sacrifices.
Yeah, I found like abilities, like the wide range of abilities are a huge plus in the game. In general, this game starts off on a good footing because of the fact that everything's just upgrading abilities. You start off with your own asymmetric tiles. You start off with your own different abilities you're going to have, and you start off different. You're already picking things that are going to make you more powerful and different than other players before the game even begins. From there, you're going to be upgrading your troops. You're going to be upgrading your buildings. You're going to be upgrading the hand of cards. You're going to be upgrading your creatures. So everything, there's like 4 different ways you can be developing and upgrading and augmenting how good you are and in what ways you're good. And then going to like what you're saying, there's like strength. Hey, look, I'm stronger than you, which sometimes is bad. And then there's things like, hey, you can attack me all you want. I'm just going to reform my troops at the end of combat, which is like, it makes you a target, but it makes you a target that can recover. So like lots of these balances as far as what is best and what works and what that trade-off is. Going through the hand of cards is huge. Building up your hand. And I found it interesting because I was actually sitting over here. I was the one player who didn't have that upgrade, but I think I had the largest hand by the end of combat. I think I had like a ton of other ways that I grabbed extra cards and just gave me cards. It gave me abilities that I can play into battle. It gave me that option to sit there and say, okay, great, I can either take this benefit, or I can just take that card so you don't know what's coming. And players not knowing what's coming, players not being able to map that out and having that little sense of surprise. By the way, fun fact, there is a 4 in this pile.
Oh, nice.
Pay 2 for 4. Okay, so there's a single 4 in that pile, which can actually mess with people. You have to pay for it, but suddenly there's a 4 in play, and that 4 can mess with people, and it adds all these ways you can just mess with others. Combine that with the creatures, and the creatures are already cool. The level 1 creatures are cool. The level 2 creatures are cooler. The level 3 creatures are
even better.
Even cooler. And then it has, as you mentioned, and then it has this interesting aspect that I both like and don't like, but I'll include it here because I like it enough to include it. It has the aspect of you're trying to, when you get a creature, when you buy a monster, you have to try to predict how many rounds it's going to be useful for, which is a little bit frustrating because you're like, I just want to buy the creature, but it actually has this interesting economy to the game that mentally, by paying a little bit less for it than you could have, you're ready to move on to the next one. Versus when I play other games that have the system, I always have that little feel of waste. Like, oh, I get a new creature, but I replace my old one. In this one, I planned for that upgrade. I planned for, what's that term in technology where you have planned something?
It's planned obsolescence.
Planned obsolescence. You have planned obsolescence of your creatures. And
is that actually the word, or did you just make that up?
No,
it's what Quack and Go is doing to Board Game Co.
Oh, planned obsolescence is the idea that you know your technology won't last forever because technology is iterating so fast anyway. So you just either maliciously or practically you understand that things won't last forever. It's the anticipation of the ending of a thing, and that has that with those creatures. And I kind of like it. I didn't at first, but I kind of shifted into appreciating what it was doing. But generally, it's powers and upgrades, it's abilities, it's combat, and it's fast-paced combat. And my biggest thing, easily my biggest thing, if I'm picking a singular thing that I like that stands out for me about this game, it's the idea that being in combat, even if you're losing, even if you're fully aware you're losing, there's no Loki strategy here.
It's not detrimental.
It's not detrimental.
Yeah. It's always best.
You want to be involved. Like, at the end of the game, like you're sitting there and saying, like if you are too strong, people won't attack you, and then that's not good.
You're begging people to fight you.
You're like, please show up at my party so you can kill me, and you're like, but you'll kill me, and you're like, no, we'll make it work. We'll talk. We'll figure it out. But they don't trust you.
Yeah.
And so you're not in combat. Other players are, and other players are slowly getting stronger by just being in combat. You have to mentally get over that hump, and then suddenly losing is not a problem. Losing is an opportunity, and I like that the game both gives you a ton of... I mean, I don't even know how many cards I played, how many combats. I want to count how many combats I was in last game. I must have been in like 20 plus combats in the game.
I mean, I refreshed my deck only once, and I was in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think plus 2 more, 9 because when I refreshed it, at least 9 combats.
I was easily more than that. Easily. I know I had a bunch of cards. I refreshed twice, and I had a whole handful at the end. I don't know how many combats it was. If it was 15 to 20 is what it was, and it's a lot. It's a lot of fights, and I like that the game does that. Anything else we have? Have you even gone, or you're just kind of like...
She hasn't gone. She's been waiting for you.
Your favorite part about the fact that being in a combat and losing as not detrimental is probably also my favorite part of this game. And then, should I just start launching into my thoughts?
Where do you not like about the game?
You don't have any more positives?
This is so hard for me. This is the genre
to be clear, we're going straight to what we don't
like the most. And this game is probably my least favorite area control game I have ever played.
Ever played?
Ever played.
What? Are you kidding me?
I did not like this game. And this is why we don't talk about our opinions before we come on.
Ever played?
Yes, I did not like this game. And my problem is that it has things that I should like. It has powers and abilities. It has upgrading. It has really cool monsters and creatures. It's area control. It's fighting. It has all these things that I should like, and I did not like the entire culmination of the picture that gave me.
It might not be area control.
It is not.
That's a technicality. Ever played?
Yes, in this genre, this is my least favorite. That being said, I still don't consider... it's definitely not a bad game. I just don't think that it's going to be in anything of my top. I did not like how tight it felt in resource management the entire game. It was really hard, and there were at points when I just was strapped. And I didn't have resources to walk into a city to get resources. I had to use this action. I don't like how weak this action is, that then there's no way to upgrade this action. I think having a way to upgrade this to get more resources should be an option.
It's meant to be it's not meant to be a focus. It's meant to be like, okay.
I use that option almost every round after mid-game.
Oh, interesting. I used it twice the whole game.
No, he used it a lot, and
constantly.
I feel like also as soon as there's a runaway leader, it is really hard to catch up. I felt...
Hey,
what?
I was that runaway leader.
No,
I don't know if I agree with that. Meaning, if even going by our last game, I mean, we were pretty close to the end.
I felt like I was a step behind the whole time, and I didn't feel like I had a chance to catch up after that second round of you each having 9 and 7 sacrificial things, and I only had...
being behind, being hard to catch up, I agree, but I don't know if I'm so clear on the runaway leader yet.
I also, the cities, as you get higher and higher, you are only ever going to be able to take this action once.
Twice, potentially.
Twice, potentially.
Potentially walking in with 2 different troops. I just think that, getting a card in the 4th round of the game doesn't mean much. Unless there was something that gave you points for having so many cards, there's nothing.
And I didn't go to that city the last round of the game. I agree with you.
I went to the city that only gives you points.
And I went to the hostage city.
Right, and so it makes the city just less desirable with that being in the last round.
If we're going to complain about that, I will agree with you. That seems like a silly card.
In general, I felt like the way the city's upgraded, only being able to take one, I kind of want more. I felt very restricted, and that's not a feeling I enjoy in the game. I like when things expound upon each other and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you're having these fantastic, amazing, oh my gosh, how did you do that turns, and I never felt like that happened here. The monsters, I felt like there was one good monster out of each tier. I didn't feel like the monsters were equitable once you got to the higher tiers. There was one monster I wanted from the 3rd level, and you took it, and I had no access to it.
Well, to be fair, the 3rd tier only has 2 monsters.
Right.
At the moment. Kickstarter things,
Of course. Everything I'm saying is in the caveat of a prototype, and I do plan on playing the final version because I want to see how it changes. Also, being a prototype, it was just frustrating dealing with, which troop of that is yours? We had no real way of demarking which one it was.
Yes.
I think we could have even just taken a token and put it under that troop leader.
Well, part of the problem as well with prototype, it might even be easier just from a stance of having the models actually match as opposed to what we have now.
Right.
But even then, I agree something more would be helpful.
Right. And so, it wasn't the idealist play. I would love to play this in a final version. It just being tight the whole time was not so much fun.
So let me jump in here.
Oh, I have things. I'm just waiting.
Yeah, because I have a lot.
Although I do not have your level of.
I have a lot of complaints, and I think I have one major complaint that's different from Shira's, but then I have one that I've been figuring out how to. I have one that I've been figuring out how to express, and I think she's doing a pretty good job at it. This game rides the line very tightly on the balance of really tight really tight resource management, action selection, everything you do matters, and if you mess something up, everything can sort of fall apart.
Sure.
And I think I'm with her at the moment where the game currently is, that I am more frustrated by the limitations without cool effects than I am frustrated because there's so much good stuff I want to do and I can't do it all.
Okay.
I want that to switch. Like I said, I took the debuff 3+ corn so many times on those final rounds, and I was still heavily competitive in the game. I still enjoyed the gameplay, but there was a lot of times where I felt like I was just kind of throwing actions to the wind because I was trying to set myself in position to get attacked or be attacked or to attack or be attacked, and everything else sort of took second fiddle to that. And there wasn't a lot of things I could do towards the end of the game where my limited actions felt rewarding. Instead, they felt like they were being thrown away, and I didn't like that.
Sure.
I also, probably my single biggest complaint of the game is that I feel like a lot of the game is driven by other players' agency over the game environment. I really like the combat back and forth. I like how punchy this is, and I don't agree with Sheer at all that this is the least favorite. Out of the series, this is leaning to being my favorite of the series.
Least favorite of the series is a different statement. This is aiming to be the least favorite of the series?
No.
Oh,
Out of the series, this is aiming to be my favorite of the series.
Your favorite of the series, yeah.
Yeah, I don't agree with her on the least favorite of the whole genre. For me, this is really, really good, and I see a ton of potential that I think is going to be ironed out throughout the course of development. However, right now, my biggest critique is there's so much agency given to other players around the table that if they decide they don't want to hit on you, they decide at the last round you're a little bit too far ahead and everyone gangs up or fights in betwixt themselves, you can watch the game be taken from you even if you played it perfectly based off of an element of abstracted kingmaking. And kingmaking, while it's a mechanic some people enjoy because they like that back and forth, they like that punch, it is an element that I have found that I do not enjoy in games almost ever.
Yep.
And this game, I think, leans a little bit closer to that than I would like it to. I would like agency over maybe taking another action or drawing people in to fight you or forcing things to happen to other players that benefit you, even if you have to take your time to do that.
So I'm definitely, I don't actually know where we are in terms of you and I. I'm definitely above you, I know that. But I'm not without complaints, although the complaints I think to me mostly come down to preferences with some silly things. Like I do agree that like having that card at the end is like, okay, great. The best case scenario, I have one card for my very last combat. It's just not satisfying.
You're gonna get a +1. You already have that card in your hand. You already have that.
It's a wild card. I would never take that on the last option. I mean, not never. Maybe there's a chance, but I can't see myself doing it. Overall, I like a lot of things the game's doing. We've talked about that already, doing the one I liked. What I don't like to me is a few things, and it's going to be hard to not... I'm not going to be comparing this to the other games in the trilogy. We'll say that for another quadrilogy. I'll say that for another time. But there are elements of the game's systems that I prefer one versus the other. What Yucatan does that is not as fun to me compared to some other games is... many of the things you can get, with the exception of the creatures, and the creatures are my favorite part because of it, many of the things are your own board. I don't have that sense of taken away from you. I don't have that sense of we're going for like, I have the sense of, okay, great, I'll take my own upgrades, but it's not like, ooh, you have that building, I have that building. It's, we have our buildings, I'll get to them, it's not a problem. We have our little player upgrades, I'll get to them.
I like taking
other people's things. I like drafting other people's things. I like taking things from open store tableaus, whatever. I like taking the stuff. It gives that sense of urgency. That urgency that I love in the creatures. The creatures are my favorite part of the game easily in terms of the upgrade paths you can have, partially because their abilities are the coolest, which I'll get to in a second, and partially because of the fact that they are limited. It's more of a drive to get them, which brings you to the second aspect, which is the abilities of some of the things are not as cool. Those buildings, very functional, and I think they're arguably essential to build up your economy and get things going. But they're often a little bit boring. Hey, that thing costs a little cheaper. Hey, that thing costs a little cheaper. Hey, that thing costs a little cheaper.
They feel very lame.
I don't mind that with one or two of them. With one or two of them, that's economy and that's essential. They're all versions of that. They're all versions of this thing costs a little cheaper, which is not as satisfying. They are very helpful. In our last game, I upgraded nearly all of my buildings, and it very much worked, but it wasn't exciting.
They gave you points also.
Correct, and they gave me points, but it wasn't exciting as far as the buildings. Your troop upgrades are exciting, but not limited. Your buildings are not excited and not limited. The monsters are exciting and limited. So the monsters are my favorite part, although the cars as well. That's another thing. The cars are my favorite part as well. The same reason.
I would love every element of this game. Rubber stamp yes on this game, and then go to your abilities, go to your factions, go to your leaderboards, go to the cards, go to the creatures, and take it up 20% or 100%. I want everything crazier,
No, the
faster,
creatures I actually think are great.
more crucial.
I don't think the creatures need to be
but I want more of them.
More creatures.
The abilities are cool. I want everything emphasized more.
And then the last thing. So I basically have 3 things. We covered the first 2. The last thing I have is more of a just typical aspect of the way I like games, which is I don't think there's ever a question here, I always prefer games that the game end isn't determined by a limited number of rounds. I like it when games, and I don't even care. We once played a game of Finish that lasted 1 round. I don't care. It's amazing, but I didn't know that going in.
We have a pyramid here.
Yes.
Why doesn't the pyramid drive some degree of endgame?
Well, we can figure that out later. Oh, possibly,
I'm just saying.
Yeah, the idea of that. I like it when games sit there and say, here's an objective, here's something that triggers endgame, but keep going forward. And I'll tell you why I like the difference. It's often that otherwise I find myself getting too bogged down in the math. I get too bogged down in the math of, I only have 2 rounds of this thing, I'll buy that, but it's only going to be for 1 round, is it worth it? I get too bogged down in whether something is worth it or not, which, while practically relevant, is not as much of a fun of experience for me as buying that amazing creature, even if the game ended next turn, but I did the move that made sense with what limited knowledge I had. It doesn't matter that it wasn't worth it in hindsight. I didn't walk in turning it into a mathematical equation of what works. In general, in any game system that I have with limited number of rounds, I always prefer players driving endgame and me not knowing when that's going to happen exactly, even if I can see it coming. And so that's my last complaint, and it's a preference thing.
My concern with end round, unless something drastically changes, is because the game's built off of a sequence of threes. Three actions, and you activate every troop once during every period of time. To keep it balanced when you're driving towards endgame, you'd have to have some sort of equalization, and I personally think the game falls off hard if I make it to a 5th and especially a 6th round of the game, of just the time length of it. I think the game plummets if I make it to like 6 full activations and everything. So there's a balance there, but I agree with you.
And I will know people will comment that Blood Rage is my favorite area control game and it has a limited number of rounds. I know Blood Rage is that good. It's the exception despite that. I don't like that aspect. I don't like the aspect of going to Blood Rage and choosing a monster in the 3rd round. We're getting to sidetrack. My point is, yes, I know I'm being inconsistent. It's not inconsistency. It's just I like Blood Rage despite that. But anyways, that's my stuff. Anything else we want to dive into as far as complaints?
The balance thing. I just felt like it was... I think there's still some balance tweaks needed in terms of balancing all the creatures, in terms of balancing, like, in the 3rd round, like you were saying, if someone gets too strong, it is really hard to then fight them until you get strong enough, so you end up fighting the other 2 people. I'm wondering if a 4th player helps with that.
I happen to, and this starts moving into back and forth disagreeing, but I happen to think that part of that will come down to at least having 1 troop that is a target. Having 1 strong troop, 1 target troop, and give different types of abilities, and I think you want having strength in both.
No, my troop that was strong was in. My troop that was a target was out. So I wanted people to fight me, but I was only also perceptionally too strong. When you actually looked at the math and how the game kind of went, the end result was not me being too strong. The end result was you 2 feeding each other. And so, like, Sender's escalation of points was actually driven largely because of the perception and not the reality.
Yeah.
And the one thing is just a nitpick. It's really hard to remember to pay a corn to move. It was just something that, like, throughout the whole game, it's like, you have a free movement with one of yours, but you don't have it with the other. I think that mechanic can be scrapped and, like, just tweaked a little bit in other areas.
Yeah, which brings us, I mean, we could do what we conceal as not liking. Generally, when we have 3 opinions, I usually don't feel as strongly about it, because we
probably covered it all.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move into final thoughts and rating. Let's start from my perception of what will be the lowest to the highest. Go ahead, Shira.
Oh.
It's a 3.
It's a 3.
It's an average. It's an average game. I will continue to still play it with you guys, but I won't seek it out
till that final production copy comes in.
Tentative ratings, by the way. Tentative.
Right now for me, I think most of the series has been a 3. I think this is probably like a 3.8, leaning on a 4. This, like I said, is my favorite so far from the collection. That being said, this is going to drop if the game doesn't arrive with everything funner. If it's not all a bit funner, meaning more powers, more abilities, more crazy cards, more high costs, just more manipulation, I think it will probably settle at a 3, but right now it's going to be a 4 for me.
So I'm higher and lower than you in this manner of speaking. For me, it's a 4. It's an easy 4. But the flip side for me is that the other 3 games in the series are all solid 5s. I love Inish. I love Cyclades. I love Kemet. I'm not going to go into a full comparison now. We'll save that for another time in a future copy at some point. But for me, the comparison, the highs of this game hit the highs of that game, and in some senses are actually better and faster. The amount of comets you have, the creatures are a ton of fun. The card play I like a lot more than Kemet. There's all other shifting. I should not do this. But either way, point is, there are many aspects of the game that I like just as much or more than others in this genre or series. But there are also aspects that we talked about, those 3 things I like that some dislike, that some of these things are, the timed rounds take a little bit away from the potential, it turns a little more mathiness, the fact that some things are just not as fun as others. So there are elements enough that take it away that while it is a 4 for me, while it's a really solid, enjoyable game, it still is my least favorite of the Quadrology, at least for now, but still one that I have been enjoying every time I dived into it. Yep.
Yeah, I'm stoked about it. I'm genuinely. I feel like we've been hypercritical on it a bit.
No, it's a mixed bag.
But I really am excited to have a version of this genre, like or a game in this series that I like as much as I think this one's potential is.
I like it a lot, and my thing, I think there's a few things that really lend itself to it, but one is the time frame. I think this might well be, other than Inish, I think this might end up being the shortest of them, with the combat and mechanisms of Kemet to a degree, the feeling of Kemet is from the designers of Kemet, by the way, in case you didn't know that. But I'm very intrigued or excited to see where the final thing is. I don't imagine this gets worse for me. I think if anything, the tweaks can make it better for me, and I already like it plenty as is. It's just a question of the others in the series.
I just want the question ran through. When they're doing development work, what is fun, what isn't fun, and just redo everything that's not fun.
Recommendations?
Oh, recommendations! Game recommendations! If you like this game or you're interested in this game, check out Kemet, which is from the designers. And
I thought recommendations were something totally different. I thought we were recommending changes for the game.
Oh, no. My reviews I now do at the end of recommendation.
Sandra, I've got this handled. Don't worry. If you enjoy this version of a game with giant creatures that you're going to battle with, check out Kingdom Death Monster. Kingdom Death is going to be a giant boss battler where you're building your settlement up.
Yes, exactly. I think Kemet for me is the first thing that will come to mind, and to a certain extent, it also, I think they almost certainly were going for elements of Blood Rage that I could kind of see going on here. But yeah, those would be 2 games to definitely check out if you like Yucatan, and you probably don't know if you like Yucatan because you probably haven't played it yet.
If you think you like Yucatan, if you want to check out games that might indicate if you like Yucatan, it does have an interesting Blood Rage aesthetic to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Where you're just constant fighting in different regions. It's like Blood Rage after 4 regions have been destroyed.
Basically. In any case, that is basically a wrap. Check this out on Kickstarter. Link down below. Until next time, I'm Alex.
I'm Shira.
And I'm a duck.
Have a good one.